Hello, welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you're joining us live, super happy to have you. If at any point during the show you have any questions or comments about any of the topics that I cover, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on them before moving on, and hopefully we can kind of get a conversation going. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. Definitely, hit the like button, subscribe, do what you gotta do. It's my obligation to tell you. But it actually does really help with the YouTube algorithm. So it would be super helpful if you could do that. If you could share this with people that you know that you think might be interested, that'd be super helpful as well. So why don't we just jump right into the show? Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. Total domestic box office was $64 million, so about a 15% drop, so not drastic by any means. Again, we're still looking like this lull period before things really start to ramp up in May. In terms of films opening, so the highest grossing movie this weekend that's new is Abigail, but only coming in at number 2. It wasn't able to unseat Civil War, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but it brought in about 10 million, and unless my projections are wrong, and I say my projections, but these are, projections that I find. I use the website Box Office Pro, but recently they've stopped creating the charts that have their projections. That's usually where I source them from. So some of these projections are old. So maybe this was not accurate projection, but the original numbers that I had seen was anywhere between 12 and 22 million. So if that was still the case, then this definitely underperformed, again, only bringing in about 10 million. Off of a $28 million budget. So this is definitely kind of disappointing. It has grossed a little bit extra worldwide, but only bringing its worldwide total to about 15 million. So this is a little disappointing for, who made this? Universal, right? This is a little disappointing for Universal, but, I think there might be some good word of mouth. I heard it's a very kind of fun movie. I heard it's not amazing, but it's kind of just a fun horror comedy. That might give it, some good word of mouth and helps kind of build this box office total over time. But again, there's just going to be so many things coming out that I'm wondering why this didn't come out in September or October, right? The kind of the prime horror film time. Also coming in at number 4 is The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, the Guy Ritchie, kind of fun World War II, exactly what you would expect from the premise of a Guy Ritchie movie about secret agents, or maybe they're not secret agents, but in World War II. It brought in about 9 million for the weekend, which fell into the projections, which put it around 6 to 10 million. But it was off of a $60 million budget. So again, I would categorize this as a big flop. But again, it all depends on how it holds, right, going week to week. But I have not heard great things about it, right? So I just don't see this movie having really any legs. But again, only time will tell. And then another movie opening this week, a Spy X Family Code, White. I guess it's an anime film based off of a manga, I think. Maybe, I'm not really sure. It brought in about 4.9 million for the weekend, bringing its total domestic run to about 51 million. So this is on most of its box office, elsewhere outside of the United States. In terms of things continuing this weekend, like I had mentioned, Civil War held its first place spot in its second frame. Its total this weekend is coming in at $11 million. Pretty big drop, though, at 56%, which is not the worst that it could have been, but it definitely is a little disappointing. If it's anything more than 50%, that's when I am a little, I would be a little concerned, right? But this brings its total domestic box office take to 45 million, and its worldwide total to 49. So clearly having most of its domestic, or having most of its box office be accounted for by American markets, which makes sense since it's a very American film. And this is all off of a $50 million budget. Again, we talked about this before. This is A24's most expensive film, but it also had its biggest opening ever last weekend. So, I wonder if, again, I had said I'd be interested to see the legs on this. This 56% drop is a little concerning, but again, I think it has the opportunity to make its money back in the weeks ahead. A couple other things I want to note here. So we got 3 movies that have gone past their, are in there. I like to kind of take note of the films that have been in the top 10 for, 5 weeks or more, five frames or more. So coming in at 6, 7, and 8, we have a few of those. So at number 6, we have Kung Fu Panda, bringing in just a small, again, all of these are now just bringing in little bits, but it's all about like how long can they just keep going and sustaining. So Kung Fu Panda bringing in 4.6 million, dropping from 4th to 6th in its 7th frame, so almost 2 months now at this point. And only a 17% drop from the last weekend. Its total domestic box office is now at 180 million and 480 million worldwide, just off of an $85 million budget. So this has been very successful for DreamWorks. Number 7, we have the Ghostbusters Legacy sequel, both a sequel to the 80s movies, but also a sequel to the last Ghostbuster film that came out like 2 or 3 years ago. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire at 4.4 million, dropping from 3rd to 7th in its 5th frame. So really clonked down there out of the top 5. But only a 24% drop. So, slow and steady. It wins the race. Things like Wonka, which is, I think I was looking at, just for fun, I was looking at the highest grossing movies of 2024. And a decent amount of them are still like movies that were released in 2023. And Wonka was one of them. And Wonka was released like in November. And it had such a long run in the top 10. So again, it really is slow and steady wins the race. The huge openings make a lot of news, and then the huge drops also make a lot of news, but for bad reasons. But at the end of the day, you want it to make a lot of money. So whether it makes, I would rather have something that's slow and steady if I was a producer, but I'm not. So that's why I do this show. And so let's see, where was I? So this brings Ghostbusters Frozen Empire's total domestic box office to 103 million domestic and 176 million worldwide. And this is only off of a $100 million budget. So it's definitely getting there. Again, like the rule of thumb is you want to make double your budget to just break even, because the budget does not include things like marketing and advertising. So, this is not a flop by any means, but it definitely, would be good to see it get to 200 million worldwide to kind of put to rest any concerns about its box office take. And the number 8, I'm so sad to see it drop so low now. So Doom Part 2 only bringing about 2.9 million. It just this weekend, and I think throughout this week, it's they're doing another run, like I think just for a week, of their like IMAX run. So I went to go see it again with my fiance Viviana, who had yet to see it. We actually went to go see it yesterday. It was like perfect condition. We went to the IMAX. We saw it in IMAX 70mm at AMC Lincoln Square. And we sat like in the back row, so we had like the perfect view for it. She loved it. I already, I've talked about how much I like it. I thought that would maybe give it a little bit of a better box office return this weekend, but I guess not. Dropping from 5th to 8th place. But in its 8th frame, though. So it's been in the top 10 for a long time. And this is only a 33% drop. So, again, this is like another Chalamet film that can maybe have those legs. And as of right now, Doom Part 2 is the highest grossing movie of the year, even including things that came out in 2023. And this brings its domestic total to 277 million and 696 million worldwide. I think I saw some reports saying that it's crossed the 700 million milestone, so maybe my numbers here are a little bit out of date, but nevertheless, it's either has crossed or will soon cross the $700 million mark, which again is just could not, I say this like every week, could not have happened to a better film, especially considering it was only made for $190 million. When I say only $190 million, but that rate of return is pretty good. It is definitely doubled its budget, right, worldwide. Let me see here. I don't think there's anything else. The only other thing I want to say is I'm just disappointed the first Omen has really flopped the way it has. I went to go see it. You can find my review online at cinemacusa.substack.com. I thought it was really great, but I'm a little biased as like someone who's like I'm a Catholic, so the film, definitely appealed to my horror sensibilities, but I guess it just didn't really make enough of a splash. So it's at number 10, only bringing about 1.7 million. It dropped from 7th to 10th place in only its 3rd frame. And this week it had a 55% drop. It had a $30 million budget, and it's made about $45 million worldwide, so it hasn't quite doubled its budget, but it's not necessarily a flop either. But it's now at number 10, so unless something above it really tanks next weekend, which is possible, because I don't see this anime film that opened at number 5 staying in the top 10 next weekend, so it's possible, but I would not be surprised if The First Omen, unfortunately, is no longer with us. Rest in peace. Okay, just want to give a quick shout out to some reviews. I had mentioned earlier that, about my Substack newsletter. So Cinema QSO is not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is that Substack newsletter where I release more formal written reviews for new movies coming out. So I just want to give a little plug for the reviews I released this past week. Like I said, we had a review for The First Omen, as well as for Monkey Man, the Dev Patel action film, and then the Alex Garland dystopian thriller Civil War. So you can find all those reviews at the link in the description. You could also just go to your browser and type in cinemancuso.substack.com. Let me just grab a quick drink before we kind of get started. Okay, let's talk about story number 1 here. So Netflix has announced that it will stop reporting quarterly subscriber numbers in 2025. It's saying that it is focused on other metrics right now, mainly retention and engagement with the subscribers it has. Obviously, it still wants to keep growing that, but the kind of background of this is that for most of Netflix's history, at least as a public company, and more specifically, during this age of streaming. So maybe like the past 15 years or so, I think. When did they start their streaming service? Like 2007 or 8 or something like that. Maybe it was later. But in any case, the main metric, this was the era of, when a new industry is kind of being born, a lot of times businesses that are pioneering that industry are not profitable. And yet they keep growing in terms of and the stock price goes up. And the reason for that is because people are like, we don't know how to make this profitable now, but if we do, it's going to blow up. So people want to get in now while it's cheaper. So for the longest time, Netflix measured its success off of its subscriber counts, right? And that became the goal when all of these legacy media companies entered the streaming game, like Disney and Warner Brothers and Paramount and all of them. They also, too, focused on building subscriber growth at any cost, regardless of how much debt you're accumulating, the expenses you're accumulating. And this really kind of all fell apart. I think it was like late 2021 where Netflix for the first time reported a decrease in quarterly in their subscriber count. That for the first time they actually lost more subscribers than they had gained. And essentially the whole entertainment industry kind of had like a mini crash because everyone had put all of their eggs in this basket that is streaming. Which in retrospect was really dumb financially because, again, it was not profitable. And you could say yet, but the first part of the sentence is still true. It was not profitable. So, Netflix's share price tanked. All these other media companies, their share prices tanked. And the whole industry started to rethink, how can we make this, we can't just focus on subscriber growth at any cost. So, for example, Netflix, like I said, is really trying to focus on retention. So keeping the subscribers it has and engaging them and having them using their service a lot, right? We have a quote here from the earnings release with Netflix kind of explaining their reasoning why they're going to stop reporting these quarterly subscriber numbers in 2025, saying, quote, "As we've noted in previous letters, we're focused on revenue and operating margin as our primary financial metrics, and engagement, i.e. time spent, as our best proxy for customer satisfaction. In our early days, when we had little revenue or profit, membership growth was a strong indicator of our future potential. But now we're generating very substantial profit and free cash flow, or FCF," end quote. They say they'll still announce some major subscriber milestones, like if they hit 300 million subscribers or something like that. But there's no longer going to be like these regular updates where, for a long time, it's like every quarter they would update whatever that number was. They would update that. And they're also going to stop reporting the average revenue per member, so how much money they're actually making per subscriber. And again, this makes sense because there's so many other ways that Netflix makes money besides just memberships, right? Here's another quote. I think this is also from the earnings release saying, quote, we are also developing new revenue streams like advertising and our extra member feature. So memberships are just one component of our growth. In addition, as we've evolved our pricing and plans from a single to multi-tiers with different price points depending on the country, each incremental paid membership has a very different business aspect. Different business impact, end quote. So I see exactly where they're coming from. That essentially, in the old days, the only way to really measure how good we were doing was how many subscribers we had. But now there's a lot of ways to monetize a single subscriber, right? So the password sharing crackdown, where you could pay this extra $3 or $4. You can have more devices connected to your Netflix account. You might have an ad tier, and that means we're creating money regardless of your subscription, right? Just based off of your attention and that ad revenue. So from a business standpoint, this all makes complete sense, frankly. This announcement follows Netflix's quarterly earnings. So even though we're talking about how they're not really going to do this anymore, that's not until 2025. So they still did give us the quarterly numbers. So in this past quarter of the Q1 for 2024, they gained 9 million subscribers, bringing the total to around 270 million global subscribers. And the Hollywood Reporter notes, though this is not like breaking news, Netflix has a huge lead over all the competition. So Amazon Prime has about 200 million plus subscribers, but the thing is though is that is not broken up by the specific service, right? So there might be a lot of people who have Prime Video, but just as part of their Amazon Prime package because they got it because they want to get the free shipping on stuff they order through Amazon, like a book or something, right? So that 200 million number does not. They don't break it down. They don't break its user base into those select groups necessarily. The next biggest would be Disney Plus, which makes sense because Disney is Disney. They have about 150 million subscribers, but still a far way away from Netflix. And then next, another huge drop down. Max has 98 million subscribers, and similar to Prime, Max. Technically, Warner Brothers Discovery, that number, 98 million, includes not only Max subscriptions, but Discovery Plus subscriptions and just traditional HBO subscriptions. So, again, that number is also a little misleading. And then something like Paramount Plus, again, a huge drop, has like 68 million subscribers. But again, it's not like a law that you have to report this information, right? So, like Apple has never reported this data about Apple TV Plus subscribers, right? But so in addition to that subscriber count, Netflix also reports about $9.4 billion in revenue and $2.6 billion of that being profit. So again, that seems to be like the way they're gonna move, is really focusing on like those dollar amounts rather than just how many subscribers they have. Now the move though could hurt Netflix's stock price, and more so than could, it has a little bit. And obviously it fluctuates during, day to day, week to week, but this could in the long term hurt, their place in the stock market. So we have a quote here from an analyst, Paolo Pescatore, saying, quote, the movement to no longer disclose quarterly subscriptions from next year will not go down well, more so given subs growth that the streaming king has seen over the last year, end quote. So like I said, the stock dropped slightly following this news. It's in general, Netflix is down about 11% the past month, though it is up 14% year to date. So it's not like it's this huge, like another crash like in the fall of 2021 or whenever that subscriber dip report was announced. We also have a comment here from a fund manager that was on CNBC saying that this decision points to Netflix's concern over future subscriber growth, right? It's, Netflix is probably looking at the numbers and thinking, we are not going to be able to deliver on the growth. Like, we'll still keep growing, but we're not going to be able to deliver those huge headline garnering, percent increases. And that's going to hurt us more than if we just don't report the subscribers at all. So I think their strategy here is like, even though they are still growing, they're basically making the metric irrelevant before it becomes a problem, right? So like they're setting the stage now so that, in Q2 2026, when they might have a dip or something, no one's going to know that. And that's not going to hurt the business necessarily. And there is some precedent for this. So Forbes notes that, for example, this doesn't relate to streaming necessarily, but Forbes notes that Apple in 2018 stopped reporting iPhone sales specifically. As by 2018, the individual unit sales of iPhones became less important than how owners of those iPhones could be further monetized, right? With different Apple subscriptions or the fees that they're getting through the App Store, right? So it was no longer really relevant to just say like, okay, we sold X amount of iPhones, because there's so much more to the financial story, right? Similarly, subscriber numbers don't mean as much anymore when ads and those those fees that you can pay to expand the household, that can bring in additional revenue. So it makes subscriber numbers itself, while still important, not the only thing anymore. And the Hollywood Reporter notes that this move, marks the quote end of an era in streaming wars, end quote. And I talked about that before, about it reflects an industry that is moving away from subscriber growth and really trying to focus on profitability. And again, subscriber growth just isn't a priority anymore, right? And I think subscriber counts was like the big boogeyman of Hollywood for like a decade, right? So you have and that was like the impetus for all of these legacy companies to get into the streaming game, because they're basically looking around going, look how many subscribers they have, look how much money they're making, and look how much the stock price is going up. We need to get in on this. And I think that has been borne out to be, false thinking or flawed. It was flawed, the flawed assumptions, right? And this just goes to show that even Netflix, who is the most successful in this and basically created the industry, in a sense, they are not immune to this, right? They are responsible for the streaming craze in the first place, but they're also succumbing to Wall Street pressures, right? Even though it's the one that is most successful of all these different services. And I see a comment here from JJ Because, one of our loyal viewers, thank you, saying the streaming service started in 2007. Yes, okay, thank you, yeah. So it's been around for a really long time. And I remember I was actually an early adopter of both Netflix in general, when it was just like the DVD mail service, or really I should say my parents were early adopters. But I mean, I remember using it going all the way back to like 2004, getting the DVDs in the mail. But then also but also Netflix, like the streaming service. I remember I got a PlayStation 3 in like 2009. And that essentially transformed our TV to a smart TV. Like we didn't have a smart TV yet. And I remember like scrolling through the PlayStation store and looking for like media apps and stuff. And I found Netflix. And I was like, Netflix? What is this? And you go on and you sign in, and then you had access, and their library was way smaller and the interface was way worse. And it was just like, it had its problems, but I remember at the time being like, holy shit, this is amazing. And I'm the only one who knows about it. And then eventually it got more and more popular. And then obviously everyone was using Netflix. So it's interesting just to see the one that started it all is, in certain ways that they've set the tone. So it's I think it really is, it says something that everyone else is also focusing on this, but they're really planting their flag in the sand. And I'm sure the industry will follow suit. Okay, let me just grab a quick drink here. Hope you're all enjoying the show. Again, if you have any questions during the show or any comments, feel free to drop them in the chat. So let's talk about story number 2. So this one is a very frustrating story. Or maybe not frustrating, but it's just kind of, it also has to do with streaming. And the news here is that Disney wants to incorporate always-on channels into Disney+. And these channels could be broken down by a variety of topics or groupings. It could be like, there could be like a Star Wars channel or a Marvel channel. Or it could be like, I'm making this one up right now. So if this happens, we all know now that Disney actually stole my idea, and then I'll be able to sue them. They could do, like, if it's Valentine's Day, like selected episodes from all the different shows they own that are about Valentine's Day or something like that, right? And so that way on that day, people could just go onto that channel, just watch like a shuffle of, romantic themed episodes of sitcoms or television shows, right? So you might be saying, that sounds suspiciously like cable. And that's because it is, right? So this kind of interest that Disney has in doing this reflects the popularity of what's called free ad-supported streaming TV, or FAST, right? So it's a similar concept to services like Tubi and Pluto TV. So those services act just like behave just like something like Netflix. Like you can go and search a specific movie and watch that specific movie. But they also have like a section of their app that just has a stream, like a television channel, like a linearly programmed channel that you as a viewer have no control in. And that has been very popular. And Bloomberg reports that Tubi, which is owned by Fox, but not the Fox entity that Disney bought, but the remaining Fox entity that's like Fox News and Fox Sports and things like that. Bloomberg reports that Tubi has a higher watch time than like Peacock or Max or Paramount Plus, right? So people are really into, like, oh, this is for free, so I will just watch this because it is free and there is good content on there. And there's like there is an appeal in the passivity of it. The passiveness of it. There is, and I think it's generational. I don't know if it's everyone feels like this, and we'll see how the data will evolve as more and more people, like, if we're just gonna be honest, like, die. You know what I mean? Like in 20 years, people who are 70 now are probably not gonna be alive, right? So it's gonna change those metrics, and people's viewing patterns are gonna, like, on the whole, are gonna be different. But there is an appeal to that passivity, right? Like the old kind of strategy of, you're just channel surfing, might find something interesting and just leave it on. The big thing people always talk about is just throwing something on in the background while you're cleaning, or, my parents were teachers. They still are. But, well, technically my dad's not a teacher. But anyway, my parents were teachers. So that was a big thing, is like, they're grading papers or tests or whatever, and just have something on in the background. They don't really care that much. Maybe it's a show they follow. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a movie they've seen a million times. Just have it on the background. And that's kind of hard with streaming, because yeah, you could do that. You could throw something on, but it requires a lot more thought on your part. You have to be like, okay, well, what? You can't just click on Disney Plus and something just plays. So you gotta like think, okay, well, what am I gonna look up and what am I gonna watch? And then when you're putting thought into it, then you're kind of like, well, I'm putting thought. I kind of want to like really pay attention and watch that, right? So I think people long for the days of cable where you could just throw on your favorite channel and just like whatever's playing, just do stuff in the background, right? But not only that, but also like that's like the really, really like what's the word? Like casual viewer experience. But then on the complete other end of like the more boutique's the wrong word, but like someone who's like really more into content and film and TV and stuff, curation is a big factor, right? And then people talk about that a lot with like radio and music, right? Where, like, yes, I think this is the same for film and me. I think we as a society are better off that we're able to access this stuff basically at a moment's notice, right? I think that's good just for like not quite media preservation, because as we've seen, services will just throw things off all the time and it'll just disappear forever, but more so like education, right? And like if you are an aspiring filmmaker, being able to access all of these movies basically at the touch of a button is really great for you as a formative experience. You're not as locked into like, I gotta go to film school and I gotta, it's the only way to see some of these movies, because they're able to get like actual old prints of these movies. Now you can just watch it, on your couch, right? That's a net positive. But there is something to the idea of someone else saying, hey, here's what I think is interesting or good. What do you think? And giving it to you. And that way you discover a lot of stuff that you wouldn't have ever watched, or in the case of like radio and music, listened to, right? You develop a relationship with the station, or sometimes the specific DJ, or the host of a certain, like hour of a radio station. Excuse me. So that I think is a big factor, that people do want that element of curation of someone's taste, right? And, for better or for worse, that's that person's taste, and they, are going to show you what they think might be interesting. So we have a quote here from Alan Wolk, who coins the FAST acronym. Again, that free ad-supported streaming television. He said, quote, "Too often people feel that since they are paying for a service, they should only watch the originals," end quote. And he also said that these channels are, quote, "a great option to break consumers out of the habit while also showcasing the depth of their libraries," end quote. Yeah, and again, that's the thing, whereas, like I talked about before with music and film and TV and other things like that, again, there is an element of like the browse feature. Like obviously, of course, like Netflix, like it's famous for like you just go on and see like the recommended or the for you or the, you know, like the top 10 of the week or whatever. But it's not as easy to, like, you really like have to know what you're looking for, I think, to really get the most out of these services. So there is something to the idea of just throwing on one of these channels, and you might see something that you never even heard of that might surprise you. Interestingly though, by contrast to those free services, like Tubi and Pluto TV are like completely free. The only thing you're paying for is like your internet, right? Whereas those are like actually free, you would already have to have like a Disney Plus subscription, right? So this is not like a free alternative. Like this would just be like a function of your paid subscription. So they're technically not free. So instead of fast, it would just be ad-supported streaming television. Which again, it already does. Like there are now ad tiers of Disney Plus, but again, those are things that you would choose to watch. Whereas this would just be like a linearly programmed channel. So the reason why I said at the beginning of this story that this is frustrating. And again, I don't know if it's really frustrating, but I think a lot of people feel frustrated because streaming basically destroyed the traditional television model of linearly programmed content. Completely obliterated it. Obviously, it still exists, but it's a pale imitation of what it once was. And now again, like we talked about in our previous story about Netflix and subscriber counts and companies not being as concerned with that, being more concerned about revenue and profitability. It's basically everyone's realizing we killed this sector, but 90% of the things about that sector are actually really good business models, so we should bring that back. So streaming is basically just becoming cable again, right? So bringing the ads in was the first step, right? Once you started having ads with streaming, because I feel like the big draw of Netflix when it first really became a streaming, like really entered the mainstream, was no ads and you can access it whenever you want, right? So we still have the watch it whenever you want, but now there are ad tiers, right? So obviously you don't have to have ads, but now a lot of, that's the cheaper option. So if you're maybe on a budget, and who isn't in this economy, ads are becoming way more ads are becoming way more a part of most Americans' streaming diet, right? So that was the first step. And now you have potentially linear programming that's out of your control, right? Just like the old days. So now you're kind of losing, like you could still watch stuff whenever you want. There is still that asynchronous element, but that is now becoming an option. Like people willingly will want to do that, right? And I think this is really, I think these companies are really going to push for this because, again, it helps keep the flow of ads chugging, right? Because that would certainly, again, like this Disney Plus, like you might have a Disney Plus subscription and you might have the ad-free version. I would imagine these channels would still have ads, right? So it's just another way to squeeze out more ad revenue from its existing subscribers. So those are things that make it very similar to cable, and I'm predicting that I think the next, and this is already kind of a thing, I really think the next real big trend is going to be bundles. So instead, like the proverbial seminal cable bundle, right? I think it's going to become a lot more prevalent that you can't get Peacock alone. Like you can only get, it's like, it'll be like Peacock, Paramount Plus, and Max or something. And they are like a bundle and you get all of them or you get none of them, right? I think that's going to be the next big move because a lot of these companies, like I've talked about many times on this channel, there's just not enough content for all of these companies to have their own streaming service. I've always felt that there could be more competitors to Netflix, but they should all be like Netflix in that they are not, that they're independent, that they are not creating their own content. I know Netflix, there are Netflix originals, but I really feel that these businesses, their best bet retroactively would have been to never do these and just create original content for Netflix. Like Disney could strike a deal to create something like The Mandalorian on Netflix. Now they're in too deep. They've already dumped way too much money into these streaming services, so it might be the best thing long term to ditch these, but there's no way they'll do that. So I could see that the next big trend is going to be like the only way to make this financially work is to bundle all this shit together for people. So, you just get, again, like the 3 service bundle, and there's no way you can't get them separate. Like you either have to get all of them or you get none of them. And this whole thing, this trend of streaming emulating cable and just television in general raises an interesting question. At least I think it's interesting, is that why did people ditch cable in the first place? And I think the answer to that question should tell us a lot about how streaming should move forward now. Did people ditch cable for streaming because of the format of the linearly programmed content out of your control? Or did they switch because of the high quality content? Because House of Cards was not just good because you could binge it. Orange is the New Black, like these were not just successes just because you could binge it. A lot of those shows that really helped, but as we're seeing now, the binge model doesn't work for a lot of content. But those shows, that early Netflix stuff that was really well acclaimed, like they were just really good shows, really good content. So why did people ditch cable? Was it because they didn't like cable, or they just thought, well, I want both of these things, but I'd rather just go with Netflix because the content's better than like just shit, whatever is on ABC or TBS or whatever it is, right? Maybe it's probably a little bit of both, but again, the ultimate answer to that question I think is going to be really telling for what these services should do going forward, in terms of their strategies. Okay, let me just grab a quick drink. Okay, let's talk about story number 3. So this is Hollywood. If you don't know what Hollywood is, right? The American film industry, primarily located in Los Angeles, but Los Angeles is reporting that productions are struggling after the dual strikes of the actors and writers strikes from last year. So according to Film LA, which is like Los Angeles's like film office, government office, shoot days dropped about 8.7% in this first quarter of the year. Now that's compared to the first quarter of 2023, right? So the same time period, January to March in 2023, there was more shoot days happening in the city of Los Angeles. Now, to be fair, the amount of shoot days that happened this year's first quarter is up 23% from Q4 2023. So there is some recovery happening, but it's nowhere close to where it was a year ago, right? The main source of this 8.7% drop is because of a double-digit loss in television production, right? That is like the main source of decline that brings like the whole average down, which makes sense because TV shows just have more shoot days, right? And there have just been a lot less TV shows being made because of the strikes, and TV is very, I mean, so is film, but TV is very much a writer's medium, as they say, right? So a writer's strike, an actor's strike is going to cripple that. Whereas movies, there's a lot more indie movies that can be made, whereas there's not a lot of indie television, right? So the fact that all these TV shows are not shooting right now, or not shooting as much, is the main source of the decline. Though conversely, feature film production rose slightly. So there is a little bit of hope there, but again, there was just so much loss in TV production that just brought the whole thing down. And this is not just because of the strikes, right? Because the strikes delayed stuff, but eventually you would then see a return to normal levels, which has not quite happened yet. And obviously it hasn't been like a bunch of times since the strikes ended, but there should have been better, there should have been a little bit more recovery by now. So a few reasons why is that a lot of series have been canceled, right? Just wholesale, TV shows have just been canceled wholesale. And this also reflects a cost reduction strategy by the studios, right? Just because of the economy, and also, with this is story number 3, and the first 2 stories were about streaming. In a lot of ways, this is also about streaming because, even for shows that were going directly to television, they would go to streaming later, right? So it was really important for these companies with their burgeoning streaming services you need as much content as possible. That was the big problem, is that Netflix is making its own stuff, but it's licensing stuff from everybody. So it has a pretty wide library. Whereas all these companies, you're basically locked into your library, right? And that can vary depending on what's the studio, right? So there was just an impetus just to make as much content as possible, right? Sometimes quantity over quality, right? That is flipped. Again, now that streaming is focused more on profitability and also just the general state of the American economy in general, studios are really trying to cut costs. So that means canceling shows, and that means less new shows and new films being greenlit, right? And we have a quote here that kind of supports what I was saying in terms of streaming. We have a quote from Philip Sokolowski, who's a spokesperson for Film LA, saying, quote, "The streaming bubble has popped. Fewer episodes are being ordered of the shows that are in production, and a lot of shows have been canceled," end quote. So yeah, the streaming bubble was a bubble, 100%, and it's popped. And I think the industry is still reeling from that. And then another issue as to why these numbers are dropping in LA is that there's runaway production. So what that means is basically anything that is not filmed in LA. So New York, though more so like just other places that aren't traditional film hubs, right? So happening more in other cities, maybe internationally. There are just fewer projects. There's just more projects filming outside of Los Angeles, which I am happy about, and the reason why is, both objectively and subjectively. So subjectively, I'm originally from Rhode Island, right? And, I moved to New York about a decade ago to study film at NYU. And why? Because I wanted to be a filmmaker. And, I love Rhode Island, and I would love to live there. And if I could, I would. And there's some film production, but it's not consistent enough where you can really set yourself up for success to break into the film industry. So, and that's because of the way things have been. Is that all film production, like this is a guess, but I would estimate 2/3, if not more, of all film production in the United States is happening in either LA, New York, or Atlanta. I would say probably more like 80% even, or, whatever it might be. And that's a shame because other cities could become film hubs. Or rather, I would love for a world where there are no film hubs. That every city, obviously there could be some variation, but every city in America has like a thriving, healthy film industry or media industry, right? So that's like my subjective kind of like, what do they call in German? The Schadenfreude, like a little bit like, good that LA doesn't have as many jobs, right? Not to minimize, people are out of work and struggling. So I'm not saying it's good, but, I think I am happy if this results in a future where it's production is a little bit more spread out, right? It's a little more redistributed, right? But then objectively, again, I think that would just be better for America and better for filmmakers because, I've always said that like the best filmmaker of my generation was born in Iowa, will never get to pick up a camera because they don't have the access to the resources, get married, have kids, settle down in Iowa, maybe be like an insurance adjuster, retire, and die, right? And they never got that chance. So I think it would be better for society and aspiring filmmakers and artists if we're able, like I said before, spreading out those opportunities. And I think with the remote work revolution and hybrid work, I think there's more opportunities now than ever for filmmakers to, not feel compelled like, oh, I gotta move to New York or I gotta move to LA if I want to actually be involved in this industry. It'll be cheaper too because rents here in LA suck. So we also have a quote here from Film LA president Paul Audley saying, quote, "Since the first week of January, people have called Film LA to say, I'm still looking for work. The phone isn't ringing. Is the industry back? Unfortunately, production is still low and still slow and things are not as they were," end quote. So yeah, it's still slowly but surely recovering from, the past year of tumult, if we can say. And like I said, hopefully this shows a change in the industry. Like LA does not have to be the center of the universe, even though a lot of people think it is or think it should be. Okay, let me just grab a quick drink. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. So I have been talking about Paramount and what's going to happen to Paramount. It's probably the story I have touched on the most. And I've been doing this show for like 10 weeks now. or however many episodes I've done. And recently, the past couple of weeks, there's just been like an update every week, right? And this week is no exception. And I think this is really, really interesting as things are starting to develop. So, as I had reported, I really should say reported. I'm more of a news aggregator, and I give you my thoughts, right? But as I've touched on in previous videos, which you can go find on my channel, I really have a whole playlist just for Paramount, so you can go back and watch past videos to kind of get caught up about this. But Sony, you may have heard of them, is in talks to partner with Apollo Management Group to offer to jointly bid for Paramount Global. So let me just briefly give the background on this. So Paramount has basically been, the focus of a potential acquisition or merger for, I think, since late last year, in 2023. It's not been doing particularly well financially, and there's been a lot of potential buyers. So one buyer would be Byron Allen, the media mogul, who put a bid up for it. And that was actually one of my first stories I did, the first week I did this. And that didn't go anywhere. There were talks that Warner Brothers was maybe interested in merging the companies, but that never went anywhere. Apollo Management Group, like I had mentioned, had made a bid just for Paramount Pictures, and Paramount wasn't into it. So then they made a bid for the whole company, and that still fell through. And the big player here that seems to be, at least a week ago, seemed to be the most likely was Skydance Media, David Ellison's production company. And I reported last week that Skydance and Paramount have entered into a window of exclusive talks, which all but, suggests that this seems to be the way that Sherry Redstone wants to go, right? And I talked about last week that most shareholders are not happy about this, because it seemed like that deal would primarily benefit Sherry Redstone, who owns National Amusements, which has the controlling stake in Paramount Global. She would get paid a premium on her shares at the expense of other shareholders. And we're not just talking about small retail traders, like someone like me or something. We're talking about big, hedge funds and investment firms, right? Or whatever they might be. So people are looking for an alternative to Skydance. So let me kind of just break down some information here. So like I said, Sony is now in talks with Apollo, who again, like I said, had previously made that bid, to maybe make a joint bid together. There is no official bid yet. Paramount and Skydance are still in that window of exclusive talks. But if a bid were to happen, it would be potentially an all-cash offer for outstanding stock, which would take the company, which is currently public, it would take the company private in what would be a joint venture. There's no guarantee that a bid will be made at all. This isn't like a sure thing that's happening, but Sony and Apollo are beginning these conversations, right? And presumably the plan might be that Apollo would take a minority stake and then eventually down the road sell that stake back to Sony. So then Sony would acquire the whole thing. But notably, Sony and Apollo would not acquire National Amusements, which is part of the Skydance deal. That Skydance would acquire National Amusements first, and then essentially take control of the Paramount shares. Like I said earlier, Apollo had previously bid on the company, but was rejected twice, right? So like I said, they had previously bid about $11 billion just for Paramount Pictures. But Sherry Redstone was not into that because, she really doesn't want to break up the media empire that her father, Sumner Redstone, built over decades, right? So they later came back with a $26 billion bid for the whole thing, which was also rejected. Again, like I talked about in my video, I think 2 weeks ago, Skydance seems like the best bet for Sherry Redstone because, like I said, she would get kind of preferential treatment for her shares and make a lot of money. But also just more sentimentally, Skydance would be in her mind a better steward for that media empire her father built. And Paramount and Skydance have been working together for years now, so it seems like from that, I'm sure if she was hard pressed to answer why she's really focused on that deal, I think that would be the answer she would give. The New York Times notes that, with Apollo's bids, both of them, Paramount's board was concerned about making a deal with Apollo. They were concerned about the financing. They were also concerned, again, like I was saying earlier, about keeping keeping the whole thing together, they'd be concerned about, a private equity approach to entertainment. Just kind of, private equity is not sentimental. If a certain element of the business is not working, they are more than happy to just spin it off, sell it off, kill it, whatever you gotta do. But theoretically, a Sony partnership could alleviate those concerns, because financing would not be a problem for Sony. And also, like, they already have a strong presence in entertainment, and they understand the value of entertainment and entertainment companies. So that would potentially kind of smooth over any of those concerns they would have if it was just Apollo. So if this bid were to be made and accepted, and it all went through and everything, moved ahead, Paramount would then fall into Sony's already very impressive media empire. So it has a film and TV kind of wing to it, like Sony Pictures. It bought Columbia Pictures, like the iconic film studio, back in 1989 for just $3.5 billion. It also owns TriStar. It also owns Crunchyroll, like the anime streaming service. And then Sony also has like its music wing, and of course the gaming arm of its operations with PlayStation, right? And this deal could finally give Sony a place in the streaming war. So, but this is story number 4. I've talked about streaming every single story so far. But notably, Deadline notes this, but I already thought of this as well, is that, Sony has strategically stayed out of the streaming wars, right? If you notice, it does not have a streaming service. And it's been kind of what people have described as like an arms dealer, where it's like, it's licensing its stuff out, which I have said is the best business model for both the streaming services and the distributors, right? But if this deal were to go through, now it would have a streaming service without having to do the work of like building it up, right, from the ground up. But yeah, it's just been very trepidatious about entering into this streaming industry. And the Wrap notes that Sony would it owned the streaming service Crackle, but it sold it in 2019. And even back then, it knew it could never scale up to where Netflix was. Whereas Disney and Warner Brothers and Paramount, they I think got diluted, and they just saw dollar signs, and they weren't realistic about how they could grow their businesses, right? The key kind of question here with this, if this were to happen, is what would happen with CBS, because the FCC has rules regarding foreign ownership of an American broadcast company. And obviously, of course, Sony is a Japanese company, and they wouldn't be able to own a majority stake, or I think it's even like more than 25%. So Variety notes that they would have to come up with some kind of plan that would satisfy these regulations, right? Where it might be like they might need to have more partners. They have a controlling share, but not a financial share. I don't know all the regulations. I don't know what they would have to do, but that would be a roadblock. They could potentially just sell off CBS, but again, if the goal is to assuage Paramount's board and Sherry Redstone, they're like, no, we understand the value of this asset library that you've developed, and we want to keep it intact. If that's the strategy, then just getting rid of CBS, I don't think would work. And again, like I said, this is a mixed shareholder pushback, because again, the Skydance deal really benefits Sherry Redstone the most, and a lot of people are looking really for any other deal, right? And this could be the deal that satisfies everybody, right? So it could satisfy Redstone because, again, they have that experience in entertainment, and they understand the value of that and those media empires. So it could satisfy Redstone. Sony has enough cash to satisfy the board in terms of their concerns with financing. And overall, the deal would satisfy the general shareholders at large, right? It probably would have very different terms that don't favor Sherry Redstone as much. And the market seems to be interested in the idea because the stock rose Paramount stock rose about 13% following this news. And important to note that, this would be a major acquisition. But if you compare, Paramount's market cap is about $8 billion. Sony's is about like $100 billion. So like 10 times the size. So this definitely would be a big boy swallowing up a little guy, in the grand scheme of things. But if this is gonna have to happen, if there's gonna be a merger, if there's gonna be some kind of acquisition, of all the deals, and I know very well about all the deals because I've been covering them all, this seems to make the most sense to me. Now, a new other deal might come about, and I might say that makes the most sense, but just based off of the deals that are in the conversation, this seems to be the best one in that, for all the reasons I outlined. And again, it just helps Sony cement its place in the film industry, film and TV industry, amidst years of people speculating that Sony is going to back out of it and sell off Columbia and all of that, all of those assets. If it really wants to get in on the game, this would be a huge moment for Sony to kind of level up those ambitions. Okay, let's talk about story number 5 here. Let me just grab a quick drink. Okay, let's talk about story number 5. So this beautiful man, Quentin Tarantino, he has abandoned the Movie Critic as his final film. So the Movie Critic was announced, that was the title of the movie, that was going to be his final film. And Deadline reports that he, quote, simply changed his mind, end quote. Which is interesting, and I'm going to talk about why that's interesting. Because this really shouldn't be a big story, but it is for reasons I'll get into. But going back a little bit, so what is, or should I say was, the Movie Critic? So it was going to be Tarantino's last film. It was going to be set in the late 70s in California, and it would follow the titular movie critic, who was based off of a movie reviewer that Tarantino grew up reading, who would write movie reviews for like a porno magazine. He described the guy as a, quote, early Howard Stern and what Travis Bickle, which was Robert De Niro's character in Taxi Driver, it's early Howard Stern and what Travis Bickle might be if he were a film critic, end quote. So this kind of like sleazy kind of film critic guy. Brad Pitt would have starred. There were rumors that actors from many of Tarantino's past films would show up. There was also rumors that Brad Pitt would not only be in the film, but he would be reprising the role he played in Tarantino's last film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But this seems to no longer be happening, or at least for the time being. And there is precedent for Tarantino canceling a planned film. So Deadline notes that Tarantino had canceled The Hateful Eight, which was his 8th film that came out I was a freshman, so 2015. He canceled The Hateful Eight after the script was leaked online. But it was resurrected after a staged reading of the script for charity was well received by attendees and critics and stuff like that. So there is precedent of him canceling stuff, but in that case, it got uncanceled. And he's also had some other projects that never really worked out. So the Hollywood Reporter notes that he worked on an idea like I don't know how far it got. I don't know if a script was written, but he was working on an R-rated Star Trek film for Paramount that never materialized, right? But this really shouldn't be that big of a deal that a film that we didn't really know much about is getting canceled. But the reason why this is a big deal, and the reason why I'm talking about this, is because this all has to do with Tarantino's self-imposed 10-film rule. So Tarantino feels that directors never make their best movies in their later period, in the later periods of their career. And not only do they not make their best films, but oftentimes their worst films happen at that point. We have a quote from him here. I think this was like talking to, may have been Playboy, actually, in 2012. He said, quote, I want to stop at a certain point. Directors don't get better as they get older. Usually the worst films in their filmography are those last 4 at the end. I am all about my filmography, and one bad film fucks up 3 good ones. I don't want that bad, out-of-touch comedy in my filmography, the movie that makes people think, oh man, he still thinks it's 20 years ago. When directors get out of date, it's not pretty, end quote. And look, who am I to argue with Tarantino? Quite possibly the biggest film history nerd to ever exist, let alone become a director. But I just fundamentally disagree with this analysis. And maybe I don't know enough directors and stuff, and maybe that's true. But I don't know if that's necessarily true as a blanket statement, because like I just pulled up a few directors, and I know unfortunately they are all white men, right? But I think just as a good example, because these are prolific creators, right? If these directors had followed that film, that rule, we would have lost out on some incredible films. So, like, for example, if Spielberg followed this rule, his last film would have been Empire of the Sun. So we never would have gotten Schindler's List or Jurassic Park or Saving Private Ryan or essentially anything in that he did in the 90s or forward. If Scorsese followed this rule, his last film would be The Color of Money. So we wouldn't have gotten Goodfellas or Casino or The Departed or The Irishman or Silence or The Killers of the Flower Moon. This makes no sense. Especially in a year where Killers of the Flower Moon, like, I think that's one of Scorsese's best films ever. And that's his, like, 30th something film, or however many films the guy's made. Kubrick, right? Someone that, this is not a modern guy. This is something that Tarantino was definitely growing up with. Kubrick only made like 13 films or whatever. But if Kubrick followed this rule, his last film would have been Barry Lyndon. So we never would have gotten The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, or Eyes Wide Shut. Those are like some of the best films ever made. And I think they did some kind of like directors roundtable. I forget who was there. It was like Quentin Tarantino. James Cameron was there, and Tarantino was talking about this. And James Cameron basically spoke up, and he was like, I feel the exact opposite. Like, I want to die with the camera in my hands. Like, I never want to stop directing and making movies. And I think this is just a really weird, again, self-imposed rule. Because I think it also just assumes that directors are, they come out of the gate the best they're going to be, and it only goes downhill from there. I just fundamentally disagree. And I think just human beings in any facet, but especially in a creative thing like this, in a creative field like filmmaking, directors need time to develop their voice, right? So just because a movie isn't as good doesn't, like, it might be rough around the edges, but it might be, the film that director needs to make in order to make this masterpiece 15 years from now, right? So I just fundamentally disagree with Tarantino about this. But, it doesn't mean he would stop working necessarily. He says that maybe he would work on like a limited series or even plays. He has like become kind of like a novelist. He created like a novel adaptation of his own film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's written some nonfiction kind of like film criticism books. But we want to see the man make movies. And I'm not alone in thinking this is dumb. So The Independent ran an article by Louis Chilton titled, Quentin Tarantino's 10-film rule is pointless and will ultimately damage his legacy, end quote. And there's a great quote from that article, and I think it sums up the whole thesis, which is, quote, in trying to curate his own legacy, he may well end up souring it, end quote. Because again, I think he's trying to micromanage his legacy. And he's looking at film history, and his analysis is, well, all these directors, they stop making good movies after like their 10th film or whatever. Yeah, but if they had stopped, maybe their trajectory would have. I don't even know how to explain it, but it's like you can't write that future for yourself, right? I think just ditch your dumb rule. I don't know how I get so angry about this, but it's just so dumb. Like, it just creates more problems for you, because when you make a film your final film, and like everyone knows it's your final film, it's given way more importance than it may need or deserve, right? So the Movie Critic probably would have been really great, but the pressure to make it his best can create problems, because he's not just saying I want to make 10 films. Like, he wants his last film to be his best film. So this is an example of like the perfect being the enemy of the good, right? Where because of that pressure, what probably would have been like a great movie and one of the best movies of the decade is just now not going to exist, because it doesn't fit his vision of what he wants to go out on, right? But if it's like, okay, you make this movie, and if it's not the best movie you've ever made, well, you're still going to make another movie, right? I think, again, the number 10 itself is just arbitrary, right? Like, why 10? Like, why isn't it 13? Like, if you really want to do it, like, make a spreadsheet and do an analysis and figure out, okay, what actually would that number be? I personally feel like you should just keep making films until you run out of things to say, right? If you really love film as much as you do, and as much as I know you do, Quentin, that, film is not something you can choose not to do. It is something that it's like breathing. You just have to do it. But ultimately, he might change his mind. Right? People have been known to do this. Hollywood Reporter noted that, someone like Stephen King announced his retirement in 2022. 2002. And he's written 26 novels since then. So, people say this stuff. But again, I think Tarantino loves this so much that, I think he's just going to pull this out. He's going to ditch this rule, hopefully. JJ Because commented, praise the Lord, this movie would have been a disaster. Opens the door to something far more interesting for his final film. I agree, right? Even though I had said it probably would have been a really great film, I was never super hot on the premise. And to be fair, I was not a huge fan of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I found it very meandering and aimless. And maybe that was the point, but it just didn't really work for me. As Scorsese would say. He's like, movies aren't good or bad. It's just it works for you or it doesn't work for you. But I kind of agree to your point where I was never super compelled by the premise. So I think this could, again, maybe I'm all wrong. And maybe he will rise to the challenge and make his last film the best film. And this will really light a fire under his ass. But again, I just think it's really dumb to limit yourself because you don't know your 11th film might be your best film. I don't know, but maybe that's just me. I'm getting like sweaty. I'm getting all worked up about this. So why don't we move on? Okay, let me just grab one quick drink here. Okay, so looking ahead to the upcoming releases here, the only big thing coming is Challengers. Luca. Oh shit, I always forget how to say his name, and I'm Italian too. Luca Guadagnino. Because GN in Italian is more like nyeh. Anyway, Luca. He, director of Call Me By Your Name and Bones and All, which I quite liked, actually. I know that didn't get a lot of praise, but Bones and All was quite good, the cannibal movie. This is Challengers. It's Zendaya plays kind of like a tennis player who kind of gets, I think she gets hurt, and now she's going to potentially train like one of these two guys, but it's also this weird like psychosexual three-way romantic triangle thing. So it seems really interesting. It's gotten pretty good reception. It's targeting right now, assuming my sources for projecting the box offices are correct, but who knows? I gotta figure this out. It looks like it's looking to a 7 to 12 million opening weekend, which is not huge, but again, this is like a really small film, so I wonder what the budget was. Let me see. Can I find that on? No, it's not on Wikipedia yet. Usually that information doesn't come out till later, but. So I don't know. We will see. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. I'm going to see it next week. Okay, and I want to plug the best film I watched this week. This could be the film I've watched a million times. It could be a film I watched for the first time. It could have come out 100 years ago or like 2 days ago, right? Just whatever I watched this week, my favorite thing, and I want to give it a plug. And for the second time, it's going to be Dune Part 2. So like I had mentioned at the beginning of the show, I went to go see it again with my fiancée Viviana. We went to see it at AMC Lincoln Square. So I gave her, it was the best possible viewing experience for her, which is what I wanted. And it's still great. It's still amazing. It's still a 9 out of 10, like one of the best movies I've ever seen. So I just got to give it a plug. I won't talk too much more about it, but because you've heard me talk about it a bajillion times if you follow the show, but it's just so good. Okay, so I just want to give a few plugs before wrapping up the show. I have another YouTube channel called Peter Squared where I cover topics related to film and media entertainment in a more written video essay format. The video we have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at Frozen, the Disney film, and look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using these two like cartoon versions of myself, like a younger and older version. You can find that link in the description below. It would be a super huge help if you could go check that out. I also want to plug a podcast I do with my fiancée Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And this season we have been doing Batman, and we finally finished doing all those films. So this coming Friday, we're going to be releasing our franchise retrospective, where we kind of look at the whole thing and kind of make sense of it all. So highly recommend you go check that out. You can go find that in the link in the description. It's also, wherever you get your podcasts, and also on YouTube, if that's how you prefer to listen to your podcasts. And then finally, like I said before, Cinnamon Cuso is not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I write more formal written reviews for new movies coming out every week. Again, it would really be a huge help if you could go check that out. The link is in the description. You can also find it at cinnamoncuso.substack.com. That's all for this week. Thank you all so much for watching live. If you're watching after the fact, super happy to have you. Feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the topics we covered. Please, please, please like and subscribe. It really would be a huge help trying to grow the channel. I'm Peter Mancuso. Have a good rest of your week. Peace out.